Today, we'll discuss Angular services and we'll look into how we can communicate with our HTTP using Angular. So, to start with, what Angular services are, Angular services are special classes that we create to define a set of operations for specific purpose. By specific purpose, what I mean is that so in our instances, an example will be to handle all our logging operations in a single class. Now we use Angular services to implement functionalities that we keep independent of our components. In a way, we decouple our components and services so that our components are now no longer responsible for the services, for the functionalities. Uh, for example, a logging service, now our components will not be responsible for handling the logging and all. It will just call a method from our logging service and it can uh, work with it. We can also use Angular services to share data across, and obviously we can also share our logic. And when we call our APIs via services, then we can encapsulate those logic from our Angular components. And like all other building blocks of Angular services also use a decorator. And in this case, we are using the injectable decorator. So to start working with Angular service, today we'll begin with creating a basic Angular service. So if you are following along the code snippets, you can refer to the first code snippet. And I'll not use the Angular CLI to build our service. So what I'll do is inside our app folder, I'll create another folder and I'll name it services. And inside our services folder, I'll create a TypeScript file, a TypeScript class, and I'll name it employee.service.ts. Again, it's a simple TypeScript class, so I'll have to export, use the class, and name it employee service. Okay, so moving along, now I am on the second code snippet. And here you can see we need to add the injectable decorator. And I'll have to import the injectable decorator definition from Angular core. Now here you will see that injectable decorator, it expects a property that is provided in root. So this is a new feature which was added in Angular 9. What it does is it basically tells Angular that we need to register this specific service inside our root app module. So yesterday we discussed app module. So here Angular will implicitly register our service class inside our root app module. And that's what the provided in root does. And to move along now on the third code snippet, uh, you you can copy this. What it basically does is I'm removing the provided in root property from here, and now Angular will no longer know what to do with this employee service. So we have to explicitly go and say Angular that okay, we have a service and we need to register it inside the providers array. So if you follow the code snippet, you will see replace the provider array with the following line. So I'm replacing it and I'll import our employee service. So now Angular will know that there is a service, employee service, and we have registered in our Angular module. The next is our component. So this should be home component. If you could change in your files now, this is because we are now working with home component. We need some way for our components to work with our Angular service. So in this case, we will be working in our home component. So our home component needs to know where our employee service is. So if I go to the home services home component, the TypeScript file, in our constructor, I'll have to tell that for now I'll just add another one, private employee service and employee service. And this automatically imported the employee service. So what this piece of code in the constructor is doing is we are taking advantage of dependency injection, which Angular provides. And by dependency injection, what's happening is that we we are not explicitly going ahead and initializing our employee service class. So without dependency injection, we should have done something like this. We would have declared a private property here, say service, and then this dot service equal to new employee service. This part Angular is doing implicitly. Its dependency resolver is going ahead and creating our employee service proper and initializing our employee service property. So to move ahead, what we'll do is that if you remember yesterday, we created this app service class. So I'll just move the content from app service class to the newly created employee service class. And now since our home component can work with employee service class, I'm removing the app service from here. And now I'll just say, go ahead and call the get employees method from employee service class. So if I look into my code here, this table is now being populated from the employee service class. So we have created Angular service. We have registered the Angular service and we have injected the service inside our Angular component. So from now on, what will happen is inside our home component, our employee service will become, in a sense, a single source of truth. Is there any question now? So now what will happen is that employee service will become for us a single source of truth whenever we deal with any data that is coming from our API, or whenever we are posting some data to our API, our component will get its data from the employer service. For this case, we are getting our employees list from our services. So we are not going to call our APIs from inside our component and all. Everything we do with whenever whatever we work with our employees, we will handle it through our employee service.
So
So
Salim, this is Kiran. So
yeah,
you passed the employee service as a you injected to the constructor, but we used in another method that service, right? So is that accessible in other methods like so we injected in constructor, but we used in ng on in it, right?
yeah. So we are using this private property. So what Angular is doing is that it's looking that we have declared a property and then going ahead and implicitly newing it up and assigning the object employee service to the employee service property. So to better understand, I'll just put underscore here. And then moving ahead on ng init, we are using this local property here.
So
Kiran,
So
is
it's
that
that is equivalent to declaring an attribute above. So you don't need to assign the
yeah,
value from parameter constructor to an attribute.
yeah,
so
this
is
is
that equivalent to class level variable?
Yes, yeah, class level attribute.
yes, class level.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask, you guys work with dependency injection in Java, right?
Yeah, but in Java, we do explicitly assign, create variable and assign to it.
Okay, you create a private variable here and then you do it like this, I believe. Employee,
Exactly.
yeah, employee equal to employee. Yeah. So it's a one step shorthand more in TypeScript. So TypeScript is taking care of all of that and it's just giving us the private uh, variable here.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to something called as the RxJS. So what happens is that Angular implicitly works with RxJS, and RxJS is a library for reactive programming with observable. So what happens with RxJS is a stream of data, the data which we get from API or any data in an array, we can convert it into a stream of data. So you normally what happens when we call an API, we get a set of data at once, and then we start operation on that array of data. With reactive programming, you can think of it as a pipeline of data. A series of data are coming along, and we can tap in and we can change the data while we are receiving uh, a single data from our API, from our backend. So it stands for reactive extension, and we can easily accomplish asynchronous calls to our API, and also we can move ahead with callback based code.
Real quick
So,
question. From a high level, what's an observable?
so
Like a button or like talking front end component?
observable is a type that RxJS provides. So RxJS expands on the idea of there is a design pattern. Uh,
It's regular design pattern, Jared.
Okay, so this is not something. All right, we're
yeah,
not talking about some special thing in Angular. All right, go ahead. Continue. Sorry.
Salim,
yeah,
just to interrupt, can you give an example of observable? So is
yeah.
it you tag it with a class or what do you do?
It's a return type. I'll come. Like I have demo on observables.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So because RxJS is a huge library, like if you guys have used Lodash, which is a library that we work with JavaScript arrays, you can think of RxJS where we use with asynchronous call in the similar manner. Or and also it provides method chaining to our functions. In .NET we have something called as the Fluent APIs, and in Java I a link we have. In Java I believe we have something called as the mm, I believe it's
Stream,
called, yes,
stream,
some. So
yeah, you can
where you
streams from
use method chaining. I'm unable to hear now. I'm
It's a
just checking what you call in link in Java. I just checked it. Stream API, yeah, correct. Yeah. So you can think of it as similar to Stream API when we work with our asynchronous calls. And to know more about RxJS, we have this. I'll share this link, RxJS Dev, and to visualize how RxJS operators work, we have the RxJS marbles. So here I'll just show a simple some of the simple functions. So say I need to find something. So here how our API is sending us data. So we are receiving 2, 3, 22, 5, 6, and 1. So we can say that for x such that x is greater than 10. So give me only those data which is greater than 10. And here when we reach 30, we pick the 30. And then we ignore 22, 5. And when we'll reach 60, we'll pick 60. So we work with the data in a pipeline manner. So primarily what we will work with RxJS and Angular is we will work with observable types. So if we look at our code, at present in our employee service, what we have is we have a static, we have a hard-coded data of iEmployee type array. So now we are just sending an array back to our component. What I'll do is I will make it observable. If you are following along, you can refer to the fourth code snippet. And to make it observable, we can just use one function from observable, that is the off function. And I need to import the off function. So here it says import off from module RxJS. So what now happens is that my employee array is being treated as an observable type. An observable it's a generic, so it expects the an object as a generic type. So now my return type should be of observable. And I have to import observable as well from RxJS. Okay, so when we work with observable, there is two concept. One is to make our data as observable, and the other one is to subscribe to that observable stream of data. Now we will no longer be able to assign our function, our data from our function call in this manner. Like we cannot assign our property, the data that we receive from our function call to our properties. What we need to do now is we need to subscribe into our observable stream. And inside our subscribe method, we need to pass three properties. Uh, so if you refer to the fifth number code snippet, I'll just copy and paste the ng on init portion and explain you the code. And this should be our employee service now. Okay, so what the subscribe expect is the next. Next property is how observable looks into the data it's receiving from the back, from where we are calling it. And then here we can assign to our property the data we receive from there. The other property that observable needs inside our subscribe is the error property. Error is how whenever there is an exception that happens in our API, uh, this error property is called and we can handle our error here. Here I need to declare a property where I'll store my error messages. and complete. So whenever our stream of data ends and we are at the end of our data stream, the complete property is called. And here in this case, I am just console logging it. Okay, the stream of data is has ended and there are there are none datas left to process. So if I go ahead in my page, you will be able to see that the stream ended message has been logged to our console, which means that all the data has been received and assigned to our property here, this employees, and this employee property is rendered by our HTML page here. Uh, do you guys have any question till now for like this what the subscribe?
So, so Salim, what is the advantage of doing things this way? Earlier, we just had a ng for or a for loop, and we were just printing things, right? So when we have introduced this observable and things like that, what advantage am I getting, or how does it make my, or what is the power of this feature? Can you explain that,
Yes.
please?
Yeah. So if you think of normal uh, API calls, what happens is that we wait for the entire data to come to us. Okay, and then say we are using promise. In promise, what happens is that we wait for the entire collection of data that our API is sending back to us, and then we store it in an array. And after that, if we want to change something, we can change it within our array. But using observable, the advantage is that we can do it while we are receiving the stream of data, which makes it a lot faster if we have to make any manipulation to our data when we are receiving it. And Angular by default uses RxJS and observable to work with HTTP communication.
So will it make my page load fast? Suppose on my page I have 1,000
Ye-
records, so it'll start to load 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 50, and all. It won't wait until all 1,000 have been processed. Is that the
yes.
effect?
Yes, that's the effect, but it's one step ahead of asynchronous calls. It means Promise also provide asynchronous call, but observable really works a lot better when we were working with asynchronous API calls. So, say our API is sending data asynchronously, then observable can handle those asynchronous API calls in a very efficient manner. That's why Angular introduced like Angular included RxJS into their framework.
Okay, okay. So can you give some more examples of how we would use observable and subscribe in real world scenario that you have used in your projects?
Yes, yes.
Salim, on line number 22, we are assigning the employees in one shot, right?
Yes,
So still do like a stream of processing here.
yes,
I'm
yes.
okay.
So here, uh, here the employee, here the employee data is being assigned when the entire collection has come to us. Okay,
Yeah,
here, yeah. So the actual thing, what happens with observable is it's here. So here there is an operator which is known as the pipe, and inside pipe there are lots of operators. If I show you here, so there are lots of operators which will then work in a stream manner. Say I want to use find. Say I have a huge collection of employees and I want to go ahead and find, uh, okay, give me those employees which have a salary greater than 2000 or 3000. So at that time, what will happen is that all the data will be processed in the I'll term it as in during runtime. But previously, what was happening if you are using promise without type, you have to wait for the entire collection and store it in an array, and then use lodash or something, or the map function of the array. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But as I shared yesterday, uh, manipulating the data using RxJS, then again we are doing something with our front end and data. So we have the capacity here, but I usually don't manipulate data using pipe. Say you want to handle pagination, you can absolutely do it using observable. You can say fine, there are functions like skip, take, skip, and then there is function like merge, where you can merge two APIs. So you can concate two APIs. So again, it's a full-fledged library, but how we use it is up to us. So here, I'll in the demos, I'll show you what we need, the minimum of RxJS that we need to work with our HTTP communication. So I'll quickly show you. Okay, I'll show you some functionalities of pipe in a bit. So now to
This scenario.
Salim,
yep.
When so an example of something, can you perform operations that require all of the results in order to uh, to execute, or only things that will be executed on a single record as you're
So
getting?
the operations will be executed as we are getting. So I'll just give you an
For example,
example.
you wouldn't be able to sort, right? Because you need the whole list to sort, and this is just kind of handling it as it gets it, right?
Yeah, sorting we
Okay.
won't be able to, but we can do
I just wanted
filtering.
to make sure I was understanding correctly. That's good. Thank you.
We can do filtering. We can skip. Say so here we have a stream of data that is 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to skip the first two. Whatever the data API sends, I say I don't want the first two data. So I'll start receiving 3 and 4 now. Okay, so moving on.
one question here, Salim.
Yeah.
When you, what is the reason for having error here on the other class, other file? Error handling is there, right? You showed
Oh, you're
I
talking
believe
about with the observable?
with the observable, yes.
I think that's just if for some reason it breaks when
What
they're
is the
trying.
practical use of that? Means why error handling on the UI? It doesn't make any sense, right? Means how what we are
well,
doing,
if your
what should we do?
APIs, if your API sends you a 400 error, how will you handle it? Or it says 404, or it gives you 500 server error.
Or
Okay.
if your JSON object is misformed, it's not in the way you are expecting, would that still be caught here?
Yeah, in a way, but mostly we have to handle our REST APIs exceptions in some way,
Right.
and we don't want our pages to break.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have to gracefully get the HTTP exceptions or errors that the HTTP REST API will throw us. Say for one API, we called our API and we said that go ahead and delete, and we are not authorized to delete. I'll get a 400 error, and then on the page I can show in a pop-up that there was an error, or you are not authorized to, whatever the way we can handle it.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll show you the demo of handling the exceptions in a bit.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay. So now moving on, the main part of how Angular works with how we work with our API calls using Angular. So we need to use a class which is HTTP client. So here in our constructor, so HTTP client is a service that Angular provides.
So is it automatically registered in our root as provider?
Which one?
The client service. You said it's a client. HTTP client is a service provided by Angular, right? So do we
Yes.
need to explicitly register, or Angular automatically provides implicitly?
Uh, we need to tell Angular that we are about to use the HTTP client module here.
Oh, but you don't need to put it in the providers array?
Oh no, no, no. That's handled by HTTP client module.
Okay.
I'm having some issue with my Visual Studio. Just give me a moment. I'll just quickly copy it from somewhere else.
Since you are doing that, I believe just since I'm coming from MVC uh,
Yeah, yeah.
workflow, right? So on the controller side, we write all this exception handling and gracefully returning to UI, so that everything comes to here in this front end. We
Mhm.
have to be very thoughtful how we are handling it. We are how we representing it to the end user. So
Yeah.
whole controller functionality comes here.
So your controller is returning APIs, right? Like
It
HTTP.
yes, HTML code. Controller returns the HTML code.
So now in Angular, you will work with APIs, right? Your
Yeah.
controller
Yes,
will just return you the JSON data and HTTP contents. So
right.
every HTTP has some headers.
Mhm.
Whenever you request, there are two concepts like HTTP request and HTTP response. So whenever an exception occurs in your server, the HTTP response will have the data, the what went wrong.
Okay.
You can design your API data in such a way. So what we do is we create uh, two arrays. One is result, and the one is result where we have the actual data, and the other part is message. When we don't want to show our users what exception happened, whether it was of HTTP status code, uh, means we don't want to say that so this exception occurred, the detail stack of the exception. No, there are messages. We want to send a custom message there. We can
Hmm.
send that custom message in JSON, and we
Yeah.
can tap into that message and then display it to our user. And we can also handle that here as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Satya, you were saying something?
Yeah. So in case of Angular, I was saying the same thing. Like we are not returning HTML from the server. It's the JSON object that is coming back.
Right, right. And on the Angular, we are handling that, right? If something goes wrong with the API, basically in our case, it's a service, right? Means
Mhm.
in MVC, whatever returned from the service is basically the API in this case.
Yeah, because Angular won't be able to work with HTML or other thing. It because it
Got
will expect API.
okay.
Okay. So so Sorry about this, guys. My Visual Studio had problems resolving the dependency here. And now, okay, so we go ahead and register the HTTP client module. This is how Angular will know that we are using the HTTP client, the HTTP client service. So what HTTP client service provides is a way to communicate with our API, and by default, it works with observable types. So since we are going to get our data from our API now. Now what I did is I have just declared the employee type as employee array and initialized it as an empty array. And if I go ahead and go to the 7-number code snippet, here the first thing what I need to do is I need to say where to find my API, the server URL. And this we can do it inside the environment file. So in Angular, we have something known as the environment files. Here you can see we have two files, environment.prod and environment.ts. So ts is for our development purpose. So here I have declared an variable API host, and I have said that the API now is from this URL, which is a local host. That means I have created an .NET API, which I will be running now. And this .NET API will run on the localhost 5001. And we can use the environment.prod.ts file whenever we need our variables that has to point to the production or any variable that we need to use in production. So in real world scenario, what will happen is that we will place here and we will say that, okay, my API is say in Azure services or something like that. So say vim.com/API/version 1. So this is how we'll find out our host, and this is and in this way we don't have to go ahead and for every services we don't have to go ahead and declare our API host URL. And whenever we do a prod build, all the variables from here will not be picked. Instead, the variables that are declared here will be used in our production environment. This is, you can think of some configuration file when with, say we can also go ahead and add here environment.uat.ts. We can go ahead and add environment.sandbox and .ts, and our variables will keep changing. The values of our variable will keep changing. Okay, so now what we will do is we will go ahead and call our API. Okay, to quickly show you that my API is up and running and what my API does. Uh, so I have integrated Swagger into my API, and my API now has one controller, that is the employee controller. And my employee controller has a get method, and this get method will go ahead and send me the list of the employees here. So currently I have 3 employees here. I also have post, delete, get, and put. So if I go ahead and do a quick post, I'll say employee 4, Brian, bonus.
Yeah, very young employee, huh?
No, Brian is a dog actually. So the response is 200 status code. That means we have successfully post our API. If I go ahead and execute it again, you will see that I have successfully inserted the data, and now I have 4 records. So we are going to call this API, and if you look at the curl here, it says HTTPS localhost 5000 and employee. And to call this API, so if you're following along, it's snippet number 7. We have completed this part. We have assigned the API localhost variable, and I'm just quickly copying and pasting and replacing my get employee. Uh, Initially, I'll delete this. I'll come to this in a bit.
Line number 13, I believe. You see.
Oh, I have to assign the variable API host again to get it from the environment file. So I'll just name it API URL. And so here what we need to do is we need to get the value from our environment. So here I'll say environment.api host. So now we are getting the value from our environment's API host variable, and I have assigned it to this local variable API URL. So I'll say API. Oh, why my Visual Studio is behaving such a manner? Okay. There is one more thing that I need to assign, which is a header. Here I am declaring that. Okay. So here what I'm doing is that I'm assigning a property header, and I'm saying that go ahead and create a object of HTTP header type and assign the content type value, uh, content type key, and the application JSON value. So what will happen is that for our every API call now, in our request, a header will be added to our HTTP request, and it will say that what we are expecting is that the content type you will be sending us back should be of application JSON. That means we will be working with JSON types. And we can also add other headers in this manner. Say uh, we want to send token to our server, we can add here authorization key and then the bearer token here. And we can also add custom headers as well to work with our APIs. So now what will happen is HTTP client is going ahead and saying that go ahead and execute the HTTP get method. We are expecting IEmployee type. This is our URL, the local host, and the controller is employee. And we are expecting these headers as well. So if I now go ahead, I'll just put a breakpoint here in my employee controller just to show that it's been hit. How do I remove it? So here you can see my API breakpoint is hit, and the data should have been showed here, but I believe, yeah, so it's here. So here you can see now I have 4 records that the last one I just added, and I set the manager to be true. So now we have successfully called our API using the HTTP client, and uh, we have executed the get method. And this is how we call our APIs in HTTP client in Angular.
So Salim, whenever we make a API call to the backend, we have to use the observable or at all
Yeah,
times, or for in some scenarios we don't have to do that.
no, we always need to use observable. We have to declare our type as observable. That's how HTTP client works.
Hey, Salim, at line number 16, we are calling it, right? Get employee. It's not the
It's,
function.
it's the function declaration. We are calling
So,
it from component.
okay,
Yeah.
so it returning the list of employees, right? So why we are not mentioning the return type, public employee space get employees, right?
We are declaring the return type here.
Oh, okay.
The return type is observable of type IEmployee.
Okay, I see it.
And and here we are binding our JSON to a strongly typed model. If you remember, we created the IEmployee model.
Yeah, yeah.
Here we are explicitly mentioning it that the
Okay,
data that we are expecting, the JSON that our API will send us is of type IEmployee. So go ahead
okay,
and populate the IEmployee type for us.
got
So
it. Yep.
we didn't have to write the assignment statement. If there were 10 fields in your model, we didn't have to write 10 lines to do the assignment from the JSON object into our model. It took care of it.
Yes, it took care of it. And another advantage that we have now from means from JavaScript is that in JavaScript we don't have a way to say that my employee type is of this. So so my employee type holds first name, last name, age is manager, and bonus. So in any scenario, say if our API sends us something extra data, it will not be binding. It won't be able to bind with our APIs here, with our model here. So we are now treating our JSON data like if I give you, we are serializing it back, the data we receive from our API. We send deserialized JSON data over the by using REST APIs, and then our Angular application is serializing it back. Okay, so just working with observable of iEmployee is enough for us to work with any API backend. But there is one functionality that I worked and I like in Angular. And if you're following along, you can go to the snippet number 8, extending get employee HTTP response. That is, I can say that go ahead and make this type of HTTP response of iEmployee. Using HTTP response, I can really go ahead and work with all the HTTP data that the API is sending. And to do this, I need to add one more property here, that is observe response. So what it's saying is that get all the data that is in the HTTP response type. So doing this, what I can do now is I can change the way I'm subscribing to my uh, service backend, and here I'll just need to change it to employee service. Yeah. What I can do now is that I can go ahead and say, okay, if the HTTP status type is 200, okay. So if you see in the GET protocol, so 200 is for success. So if it's success, if our API call is a success and our body is not null, that means we have data, then only go ahead and assign it to the employees. So here I have more control now, handling my HTTP status request and response. So if I just show you what we receive back when we call it. I should remove this breakpoint. So in console, you can see I have just logged the HTTP response that we got. So here you can see the body holds the array, the data that we are displaying in our table. And then we have the other thing, it's okay. The status is 200 and all the other data that the HTTP provides. So we can work with this also. We can check and validate if our status code is not what we want. We can have conditions here. We can have conditions here and work with our HTTP response data as well. So
Yep, this is very powerful. It looks so interesting. Salim.
yeah, yeah. So to move along here, we can also update our UI here. So in this, I have put a small example here where whenever we have a success, I'll show a notification. So if I go ahead to HTTP component, so what I'm saying here is if the show success variable is true, go ahead and show a alert that the employee is successfully added. So this one, I'll just show here that we can do it here. So
Salim, when you have a second, would you do me a favor and paste the JSON from the response into the chat window?
oh yes, actually I had something for you and I forgot. I have this URL.
Ha, I was about to send. I was about to create that with that same mock IO fake JSON API and then drop it in the chat. So
I,
you,
I had it in
that's
mind.
what I was about to ask. I was about to do that and provide it to everybody, but you've got it.
You plan for things and uh, I'll send you the JSON because this one was before the session started. I don't know if it's still
Okay.
available,
Or
the
you could just
URL.
create it again
I'll,
either way, but whatever.
oh yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So just to show you here, what I'll do is whenever if we have a status code of 200, I can show this dot show success equal to true. Uh, you can think of lots of things where your status code is different and you want to show different messages, or uh, you can redirect them to different page. So you can absolutely handle the HTTP response here. But to do that, we have to use the HTTP response type here. If we don't use the HTTP response type, we won't be able to tap into and work with the HTTP response uh, data that we receive. And to just show you now, interesting. Here you can see that because my HTTP status code was 200, an alert was shown here. And we can have a timeout timer where we hide this. And there are also other uh, packages where we can show it in a toaster. Okay, so moving along. Yeah.
What is meaning of show it in toaster?
Toasters are small alert pop-up windows
Okay.
that pop up.
Okay.
So when you have
Yeah.
error, you can show it in a toaster, and it they stays there for like 1 or 2 seconds, and then they disappear.
Got it.
So now we will go ahead and add that we go ahead and do a post request to our API. So I'll just add an add button to my HTML file. And my add button has this click event, and in that click event I will have to hook it up with the add employee method. So I'll go ahead and create the add employee method. And inside my add employee method, I'll for now, since we don't have a form yet to work with, I'll just create a constant variable type. uh, the name of the variable is new and it's of iEmployee type, and I have hard coded the values here. And then I'll go ahead and call a function to my service, employee service, add employee, and we need to create an add employee method in our service. So our add employee method will be of type public add employee. Okay. So this add employee method is expecting an object of type iEmployee here. And since we are doing post, we don't need to declare a return type here, saying that by implicitly it will be of type observable. And this is our URL. It will be the same controller, just the HTTP method is different now. It's going ahead and doing a post. And in our component class, when we are calling our employee service add employee, I'm passing this new employee object type into our function, and then I'm going ahead and subscribing it. But remember that even though we have not explicitly mentioned that the return type, it's still an observable because we are working with the HTTP client. So here we are saying that if the response.status code is 200, then go ahead and set the success to true, and then please call the ng on init lifecycle hook again. So I'll just show you and explain why I'm doing that. I'll remove this from here now. Okay, so we have the add button here, and as soon as I clicked on the add button, it says that employee has successfully been added, and so Louis Griffin has been added here. And to show you, because we have called the ng on init lifecycle hook whenever we have successfully posted it, our table is now automatically updated. So if we don't call the lifecycle hook from inside this method, what will happen is if I click add, so you see only one Louis here because our DOM has not yet been updated. Our ng on init function was not called, and we were binding our table inside our ng on init function. So that's why we need to call the ng on init function or method from whenever we have successfully added our employee. So if I go ahead and click once more, then the DOM should be refreshed. So you see now we have 3 Louises here. So do we have any question till now on the post?
Line number 40 on home
On
component TS.
okay.
Why there is extra comma at the end of the line?
Whenever we declare an object, we have to
Now
define.
there's
line
just there's a trailing comma after bonus that isn't necessary. That's all he's talking about. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you keep add, someone comes and add something, he won't have to add another one.
Got it. Yep. That was a good one. Thank you.
Okay, so we change our employee data to observable, subscribe to observable, assign data to our variable, state we also provide ability to. So Angular provides HTTP client services I have mentioned, and we used HTTP client for our communication. Yeah, so HTTP provides ability to request type response object. That means the ability to assign our JSON data to a model, and then yeah, HTTP communication implicitly supports observable, and then we have worked with the post, and now moving on, we'll see how we can call the HTTP delete function. So I'll just go ahead and click add another button, that is HTTP delete here, and our delete button calls the click event, and the click event is handled by the delete employee function, which I'll go ahead and add to our home component, the method to our home component, and this will be of void type as well. And what we'll do is I'll copy this and then I'll explain you. Okay, so to delete, we have a delete button that will go ahead and call the delete employee method in our employee service, and we'll go ahead and add the delete employee function to our app service. So here if we go and look into our Swagger here to delete try it out. Let me just delete one. So to delete, if you look at the curl, it's expecting a query parameter of ID 6, and depending on that query parameter, it's going ahead and deleting the data. So to pass a query parameter here, after my controller, I'm just saying that we have a query variable ID, and then I am concatenating it using the string interpolation and passing the employee ID variable that I am expecting it in my function. And then from my home component, I am passing the ID. Here I have hard coded the ID 1. And then if I look my page, we should see the delete button here. And if I go ahead and delete, since I have not called the ng on init, it's not refreshed. But if I click here, you'll see that Peter Griffin is now been deleted. And if I look at my API in the backend, you see the ID1 data is no longer there. So do you have any question regarding the HTTP calls and all? Like I was thinking you'll have more question on this.
My only question is
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how I would reproduce this. I plan on going through the entire uh, everything we've gone through so far this weekend, and I'm not sure how I'm going to reproduce the API.
Okay. You will be able to create an API in Java, right?
Yeah, I could do that. It's just I kind of wanted to just focus on the Angular
Angular.
aspect of it, but I guess I can do what I need to do.
Okay. So if you are working with this mock, I'll just try to call this one.
Well, no, but I mean that's not going to help much when you click delete.
Yep. And no post or delete.
Don't worry about it. I can work around it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to mention something like regarding RxJS. So regarding RxJS, we just need the observable type here. And when we work with uh, RxJS, only we don't need to learn most of the operators, but the couple of operators that we used frequently is the tap operator to see what data we are getting. So here what I'll do is I'll I'll work with the pipe function. So what pipe function enables us is to look inside the stream of data, and this is where we add the operators that we'll work with. So there is one operator in RxJS, that is the tap operator. I'm just quickly importing it. The tap. So what tap operators allows us is uh, to look into the data as it is without manipulating the stream what we are receiving, and it works in a callback manner. So we need to pass here the arrow function. So what it will do now is it will just go ahead and log whatever it has received, and I'm using json.stringify to uh, to display the JSON data as a string. So if I go ahead and now run my application again and look into the console, you can see that using the tab operator, I was able to log all the data that I received from the API. So I use the tab operator uh, uh, a lot, like just to have a peek at what data I'm receiving before I write anything that I bind to the front end and all. And the other thing is that to handle exception. So here you can see in home component, we are just catching the exception that occurs. So what we are doing here is that we are saying that, okay, whatever the error is given to us, hold it in this error message variable. But here we can handle the exception that API throws. So to handle the exception, what I can do is I had to import the catch error here. And this should not have done the, okay. Okay. So what I did just now is I imported the catch error operator from RxJS and the throw error function. And what I'm doing is now say uh, I'm getting an error of status code 400. Then uh, I've declared a variable message and I'm saying that just display, just assign this string to my message variable. Mm, mm. And what I'll do in my API is I'll quickly throw an exception. I'm restarting my backend now. And so you can see an exception has occurred, but our page is not behaving or showing the exception here. We have gracefully handled it. And here you can see it's 400, but I need to show the message to my HTML page. And I can do it. I'll just quickly error message. I'll just quickly. see. So here it says something went wrong, and you can think of other UI ways how you can display the messages here. So if I don't use a custom exception here, or if I don't handle the exception here, what will happen is uh, if I throw my entire error as it is back, so it is showing the JSON object now, but that's because we are displaying it in the HTML. But here we have other properties inside our error message that I'll just quickly show you guys. So in TypeScript, whenever we want to change our Lambda functions from one line to multi-line, we'll have to add this braces. Yes, tell you. Because I faced issue with this. I didn't know how to do multi-line here. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So so if I go to console now, you can see I have got this message. If we didn't handle it, we will be seeing this message that HTTP failure response in 400. Okay, this message usually what Angular displays.
So
Yeah.
that will see on the UI instead of
Uh,
this.
but it
Would
will
it?
show in the console. It will show in the console.
Okay. But still on the UI, it doesn't look that bad, right? It's
Yes. Yes. It's not
okay.
like the
Yeah.
exception messages are there as it's in my case it's in ASP.NET.
Okay.
But you guys may not may want to totally handle all the exceptions, right?
What do you mean by that?
So for every status type, say for 200 or
Okay.
for 201, for 400, you may assign messages for each exception, each error status type. So
Yes.
that yeah, and I'll come to it, like how can we handle it globally. Currently we are handling it on each method level, but we have
Okay.
something in Angular by which we can handle all of them globally.
Okay.
Okay, so I have added employee. So I'll just quickly add one more HTTP function, that is to get our employee by ID. Here we are getting all our employees. Just to have the completeness, so what I'm doing here is I am expecting an employee ID, and it's going ahead and doing a get call to our HTTP post, and we are appending the URL with the employee ID. And if you look at the curl of this, there is get by ID. you can see that it's not expected as a query string, but just as a restful, the way we deal it in a restful manner, that is forward slash then the ID number. This is what uh, this string interpolation is doing. And I'll just quickly, but this will not work. So okay, no worries, I'll just give it a try. I'll just pass, okay, pass to, and then yeah, did we change something? Yeah. So I didn't had a code where I am binding the get employee ID by one, that is getting a single record, but I believe you get the idea of how we deal with the HTTP communication of get, put, post, and delete. So in our employee service, we have seen how we can get a list of employees, how we can add an employee, how we can delete employee, and how we can get employees by ID. uh, in our next session, when we work with forms and where we will be updating a form, I'll create another HTTP method here where we will be updating our uh, API as well. So regarding this, do we have any questions, like how, because it's pretty straightforward in Angular to work with HTTP data.
You mentioned that you will show how to handle response globally instead of each function call.
The exception, right?
The status, right? HTTP code. If it is 200, means I don't have to handle at each request call. I want to handle it globally.
Yes, globally. So for that, we have something known as the HTTP interceptor. So how HTTP interceptor works is that Angular makes an HTTP request call to our backend, and then we have a class that sits in between, and then we intercept that request, and we want to append anything, we will append it, and then we will send that request out to our backend. And then uh, whenever we get a response from our backend, we can use other interceptors, and we can change or we can tap into that API call, and then we can send that response back to our services. So I'll quickly create an HTTP interceptor here. So HTTP interceptors are just a class. I'll say default dot interceptor dot ts, default interceptor dot ts. And
And
this, yes, go
again,
ahead.
this comes as a part of services.
No, it's a class we are building, but we need to
Okay.
implement one what we call we need to implement one interface. Implementing that interface, it will give us the method signature that we need to work with it. So I'll just import it and implement the HTTP interceptor. So what HTTP interceptor gives us a request and then next. So it's we have the HTTP request, and then we have a handler, and then this return an observable type of HTTP event, and the any means since it is working with globally, so it's working with the any type here. So what I built was, if you see in the services that we created, we are passing this header, the header that we created.
Yeah.
We have declared it in one place here, and then we are adding it in all our methods. So what I will do is I'll remove it from all of here and make it a part of our interceptor. So none of our method now holds that header, and to our HTTP request, I'll add that header in my interceptor. So to do that, so I have created a variable here, modified request. What we need to do is take the request and then clone it. By clone means we have taken it as it is, and then for headers, we said that the request headers, and then set a header of content type and application JSON. So, and then we set the HTTP handler to handle the next request, and then pass the modified HTTP request. And interceptors work in a pipeline manner, so that we can have multiple interceptors, and each interceptor can change our HTTP request and append into it. So uh, it's something like of a middleware between our request and response.
Okay, please explain that one more time, Salim. Interceptor works in pipeline manner. What that means?
So if you think of an HTTP request, okay, and then you have intercepted it, you made changes to your HTTP request, and then you send it forward to Angular, right?
Yes.
And then your services call that HTTP request. So in between, you can have multiple interceptors, and each interceptor is responsible for different things. So here, what I'm doing is I'm adding headers into it. In the next interceptor, I will handle the exceptions.
Got it.
It's pretty much
Yep.
like a servlet filter if you've used servlet filters.
Or
What's that? Silver
Servlet
filter?
filter.
Oh, servlet filter. Oh, got it. Yep.
Okay. So just to show you one more thing, I should be.
Salim, just a quick time check. How much more time will you need to complete what you had in mind today?
Five more
Okay,
minutes.
sounds good. Just so that
I'm
everybody knows how long it's going to be. Thank you.
so I'm just adding Salim. Uh, so what I'm doing is I am adding two headers now. One is for content type and one is for application JSON. And I don't know why today my browser is acting very slowly. It's usually not that slow. And we are still having error. So just to show you. Okay. So
I believe you are throwing exception intentionally somewhere.
I believe so. Let me just remove it. For safety, I'm not throwing it extra intentionally. Oh, from the API. Thank you. Throwing it from the API. I wish dotted had a proper reload. Every time I have to reload my server. In Java, you have hot reload, or you have to reload every time.
We have something.
Yeah.
We have something plugin, so we use that.
Okay. Okay. Worked. Should have got the data back. Yeah, we got the data back. If I go to network, okay. One more thing. When you guys are debugging your API calls, you have to go to network, and then by default it will be in all. You have to go to fetch XHR. This was something I didn't knew. And in employee, if you look at my request headers, why it's not showing up?
You are looking at response.
Yeah. So this one is there. No, the Salim should be here. A request header by name Salim, because I have added Salim here. Default interceptor. I have set Salim here. So just let me. I'll just change it. Uh, I might be doing something wrong with the pipeline. I mean, so when I'm method chaining it. Hmm. Uh, okay, guys, I'll have to look into it. Why it's not working? Maybe it may be something very small here. Okay, not small. It's major thing. We created our interceptor, but we have
Yep.
not registered our interceptor. So in app.modules, what we need to do now is we have to register our HTTP, and the way we register our interceptors is using this piece of code in the provider. So here, so what it says is that it needs a property of provide HTTP interceptor. We need to inherit it. So it says that it's of type HTTP interceptor. Which class we want to use? We want to use our class that we created. And multi-true means, yeah, in the pipeline, in the series of interceptors, we will be using multiple, not a single one. So that's what it says. And if I now go ahead and look in my request calls, I should be able to see the header I added. So here you can see that Salim ABC header is added. So this way, when we add HTTP headers, you can think of many ways. So you can add the validation tokens here instead of passing it the other way from in the body or somewhere. And to identify, we can also pass some IDs which we encrypt and then we decrypt in our API to identify our user. So there can be a lot of things when we are manipulating our, like we are appending our request headers and response. And coming to a global exception handling, since we are over time now, I'll in my next session or in the session where we discuss securing Angular application, I will add the global error handling there. and share it with you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's it, Samir.
Okay, thank you. So sorry guys, we ran past the scheduled end time, but I think it was useful to understand some of these concepts. If you have any questions, feel free to email it to us and we'll be more than happy to provide the answers. So let's meet again tomorrow, and then we can have a nice learning weekend going over everything that we learned this week. Thank you everyone and have a good day.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.